The rain drummed steadily against my studio apartment's window as I sat at my cramped desk, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense. $28.43 remained in my checking account, and rent was due in a week. I massaged my temples, trying to conjure a solution from the endless columns of numbers that documented my dwindling finances. My phone buzzed, rattling against the coffee-stained coaster. An unknown number, probably another debt collector. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me reach for it. Hello? I tried to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. Is this Miss Sarah Richardson? The voice was crisp, professional. I'm calling from Hamilton Associates law firm regarding the estate of Margaret Wellington. My heart stuttered. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 2 decades. Margaret Wellington, my grandmother, my real grandmother, not the imperious woman who took her place. Memories flooded back, the smell of oil paints and turpentine, warm hands guiding mine across canvas, a gentle voice telling me that being different wasn't wrong. It was my superpower. There must be some mistake, I managed to say. She passed away when I was 6. Yes, Ms. Richardson. However, a trust was established in your name, with specific instructions for it to be revealed on your 30th birthday. Given that milestone occurred last week, I'm calling to inform you of your inheritance. Last week, my 30th birthday, I remembered sitting alone in this very apartment, a single cupcake with an unlit candle before me. My phone had remained silent except for a text from my father's secretary, not even from him directly, with the perfunctory happy birthday that felt more like an obligation than a celebration. After scheduling a meeting for the next morning, I sat in stunned silence, listening to the rain and my own heartbeat. I moved to my small bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, pulling out an old shoebox. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay my most precious possession, a small watercolor painting of a young girl, me, sitting at an easel. My grandmother had painted it months before her death. On the back, in her elegant handwriting, to my Sarah, who sees the world in colors others haven't dreamed of yet. That painting was the only thing I had left of her. After her death, my father had quickly remarried, and his new wife, my stepmother, Diana, had systematically erased all traces of Margaret Wellington from our home. The paintings were sold or stored away, the photographs removed, the art supplies donated. Within a year, it was as if my grandmother had never existed. Just last week, at what was supposed to be my birthday dinner, scheduled 3 days late because it better suited their calendar, Diana had delivered her usual assessment of my life choices. 30, she had said, swirling her wine with manicured precision. And what do you have to show for it, Sarah? Your sisters are both married, with proper careers. Charlotte's just made junior partner at her firm, and Madison's husband is opening their second restaurant. Meanwhile, you're still dabbling. I had pushed my food around my plate, the overpriced restaurant's lighting suddenly too harsh. My father had become intensely interested in his phone, as he always did when Diana started in on me. My stepsisters had exchanged their practiced looks of pity, their matching engagement rings catching the light. Now, lying on my bed with my grandmother's painting, I wondered what she would have thought of the life I'd chosen. I'd stayed true to my passion for art, even when it meant taking odd jobs to pay the bills. I'd had small successes, a few pieces sold, a positive review in a local arts blog, a regular spot at the weekend market where I sold custom portraits, but I couldn't deny that the constant criticism and financial struggle had taken their toll. Chapter 2, Revelations. The Hamilton Associates building loomed before me the next morning, its glass and steel facade reflecting the sun. The receptionist directed me to the 14th floor, where I was greeted by James Hamilton himself, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. His office was exactly what you'd expect from a high-powered lawyer: dark wood, leather chairs, and a view of the city that probably cost more per square foot than my entire apartment. He gestured for me to sit, then took his place behind the massive desk. Before we begin, he said, pulling out a thick file, I want you to understand that everything about this inheritance was meticulously planned by your grandmother. Margaret was one of the most remarkable women I've ever known. You knew her well? I was her lawyer for over 30 years, and I'd like to think we were friends. She spoke of you often, especially in her final years, but she died when I was 6, I said, confusion evident in my voice. Hamilton smiled, a gentle expression that softened his professional demeanor. She did, but her planning for your future continued long after she was gone. You see, Margaret knew exactly what would happen after her death. She predicted your father's remarriage, the likelihood of you being, let's say, redirected from your artistic inclinations. She wanted to protect you, but she also wanted you to develop your own strength, your own identity. He opened the file and began laying out documents. What I'm about to tell you will come as a shock. Are you ready? I nodded, though I wasn't sure anyone could be ready for what came next. Your grandmother left you an inheritance of $50 million. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair, certain I had misheard. 50 million? Yes, but that's not all. She also left you her entire art collection, including works created under her pseudonym. Pseudonym? Hamilton's eyes twinkled. Have you ever heard of M.W. Blake? My jaw dropped. M.W. Blake was a revolutionary artist who had emerged in the 1970s, known for bold, experimental works that challenged conventional techniques. Blake's paintings sold for millions, hung in major museums, and had influenced an entire generation of artists, and no one knew Blake's true identity. My grandmother was M.W. Blake? Indeed, she kept it secret for many reasons, not least of which was her desire to be judged solely on her work, not her gender or family connections. The art world still doesn't know, and according to her wishes, won't know for another 20 years. Hamilton pulled out a thick envelope. She left you letters, dozens of them, written throughout her final years, each one dated, meant to be delivered with your inheritance. She also arranged for trusted friends to keep her informed about your life. She knew about your art school graduation, your first sale, your struggles with your family's expectations. She watched over you, in her way. Tears blurred my vision as he handed me the first letter. The paper was aged, but the handwriting was exactly as I remembered, elegant, confident, full of character. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, you've reached your 30th birthday, and more importantly, you've stayed true to yourself, despite what I'm sure has been enormous pressure to conform. I've had to make an impossible choice, to protect you from afar or to let you face the challenges that would shape you into the person you're meant to be. I chose the latter, but I've made sure you'll never have to face them alone again. The next few hours passed in a blur of documents, signatures, and revelations. My grandmother hadn't just left me money, she had created an intricate support system designed to activate at precisely this moment in my life. The trust included provisions for everything from housing to healthcare, from art supplies to business investments. Hamilton handed me a small, ornate key. This belongs to a storage unit. Inside, you'll find every painting your grandmother kept from her personal collection, including several that have never been shown publicly. She wanted you to have them, along with her journals and personal papers. Why wait until I was 30? I asked. Why not tell me sooner? Margaret believed that true artists need to find their own voice, free from external influences, even positive ones. She worried that knowing about her success, her secret identity as M.W. Blake, might overshadow your development as an artist. She wanted you to struggle, to doubt, to question, but ultimately to persist despite it all. And you did. Hamilton continued. There's something else you should know. Your grandmother left specific instructions about how to handle your family's reaction to this inheritance. She anticipated complications. What kind of complications? The terms of the trust are ironclad. Your father, stepmother, and stepsisters have no legal claim to any part of it. However, Margaret suspected they might try to influence your decisions once they learned about your inheritance. I could already imagine Diana's reaction. The way her perfectly composed facade would crack at the news. My stepsisters would be beside themselves, their carefully cultivated superiority shattered. And my father, what would he do when he realized his disappointing daughter had inherited not only his mother's fortune but her artistic legacy as well? Later that day, I made my way to the storage facility. The key trembled in my hand as I approached the unit. The lock clicked open, and I pulled up the heavy door. The space inside was enormous, climate-controlled, and meticulously organized. Paintings lined the walls, each carefully wrapped and labeled. In the center stood several filing cabinets, and against one wall, a large wooden desk with a leather chair, my grandmother's workspace, preserved exactly as she had left it. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal with an inscription, "To Sarah, now that you know the truth about M.W. Blake, it's time for you to understand the woman behind the name. Read these pages when you're ready. They contain not just my story, but the lessons I learned about art, life, and the price of being true to yourself." My phone buzzed. Diana, your father is very disappointed that you've been ignoring our calls. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior we've been concerned about. Call me immediately. Looking at her message, I felt something shift inside me. The old Sarah would have apologized, made excuses, tried to smooth things over, but sitting in my grandmother's chair, surrounded by the proof of her secret life and her unwavering faith in me, I felt stronger. I turned off my phone. It was time to start writing my own story. The first month after receiving my inheritance passed in a whirlwind of decisions and discoveries. Following Hamilton's advice, I kept the news to myself while I got my affairs in order. I moved out of my studio apartment into a secure building with a proper art studio space. I hired financial advisors, set up charitable foundations, and began the process of cataloging my grandmother's art collection. Each night, I read one of her letters, absorbing her wisdom and understanding more about the woman she had been. She wrote about her decision to create M.W. Blake, about the freedom she found in anonymity, about the joy of creating without the burden of expectations. Art isn't about recognition, one letter read, it's about truth, your truth. The world will try to shape you, to mold you into something comfortable and predictable, but true artists must resist that shaping. We must instead shape ourselves. I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. Without the constant pressure of financial survival, my art began to evolve. I experimented with techniques I'd never dared try before, working on larger canvases, with expensive materials I'd only dreamed of using. But the greatest change was internal. The constant voice of self-doubt, nurtured by years of criticism and dismissal, began to quiet. In its place grew something stronger, confidence, yes, but also purpose. My grandmother's journals revealed a woman far more complex and visionary than I'd imagined. She had built her fortune not just through art, but through shrewd investments in emerging technologies and support for other artists. She had created a vast network of galleries, collectors, and mentors, all of whom were now reaching out to me, ready to honor her legacy by supporting her granddaughter. Then came the day I couldn't postpone any longer, telling my family. I arranged to meet them at my father's house, the same house where I'd grown up, where my grandmother's presence had been so thoroughly erased. Diana answered the door, her smile tight with disapproval at my 2 weeks of silence. Finally decided to act like an adult? She asked, ushering me into the formal living room where my father and stepsisters waited. I took a seat, noting how they had arranged themselves, Diana beside my father on the sofa, my stepsisters in matching armchairs, all of them positioned to face me as if this were a tribunal. I have some news, I began, my voice steady. I've received an inheritance. Inheritance? My father frowned. From whom? From your mother. The room went still. Diana's perfectly composed face showed the first crack I'd ever seen, a slight widening of the eyes, a tensing of the jaw. That's impossible, she said. Margaret left everything to Charles. Not everything, I replied, and proceeded to explain about the trust, though I kept the M.W. Blake revelation to myself. That secret wasn't mine to share, not yet. The reactions were exactly as I'd expected. Diana's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally, a forced smile. My stepsisters exchanged looks of stunned disbelief, but it was my father's reaction that surprised me most. He sat in silence, staring at his hands, as I explained about the trust, the conditions, the careful planning that his mother had put into protecting my future. When I finished, he looked up, and for the first time in years, he really seemed to see me. She knew, he said quietly, she knew I would, that I wouldn't. Yes, I said, feeling a strange mix of compassion and strength. She knew everything. Diana quickly recovered, her voice honey-sweet. Sarah, darling, this is wonderful news. We should celebrate as a family, and of course, we'll help you manage this responsibility. I know several excellent financial advisors. Thank you, I interrupted, but that's all been arranged. Grandmother's instructions were very specific about how the inheritance should be managed. But surely, Diana began, but my father cut her off. No, he said, still looking at me. No, this is Sarah's inheritance. Mother knew what she was doing. The silence that followed was deafening. I left shortly after, declining Diana's insistent invitation to stay for dinner. As I walked to my car, my father followed me out. Sarah, he called. I turned to face him. Your grandmother, she was right about you. About everything. I'm sorry I forgot that. It wasn't enough to erase years of silence and disappointment, but it was a start. The art world can be both welcoming and cruel, especially to newcomers with money. Over the next year, I navigated this complex landscape with the help of my grandmother's network and her written guidance. I established the Margaret Wellington Foundation for Arts Education, providing scholarships and grants to young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. I renovated an old warehouse into affordable studio spaces for emerging artists. And most importantly, I continued to paint. My work began to attract attention. Critics noted the bold techniques, the fearless experimentation, unknowingly echoing what they'd once said about M.W. Blake. A few even drew parallels, though none suspected the true connection. Diana and my stepsisters made numerous attempts to insert themselves into my new life, each one more transparent than the last. Business proposals, charity event invitations, casual mentions of investment opportunities. I deflected them all with polite but firm refusals. My father, however, began a slower, more genuine journey of reconciliation. He visited my studio one day, looking out of place among the canvases and paint-splattered floors. "This reminds me of her," he said, running his hand along my grandmother's old easel, which I'd moved from the storage unit. "She used to lose herself for hours in her work. I never understood it then. I thought art was just a hobby." "Is that why you tried so hard to push me away from it?" He nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting you, giving you the security she never seemed to want." He laughed softly. "All this time, she was the one protecting you from me." I watched him examine one of my recent paintings, an abstract piece inspired by my grandmother's journals. "What do you see?" I asked. He studied it for a long moment. "Freedom," he finally said. "I see freedom." The next year brought more changes. My work was featured in major galleries, the Foundation's first class of scholarship recipients,